Вот такой стишок у нас получился. Да, Вика?
Да.
Вот я обычно пою ей, а она мне рисует. У нас такой симбиоз.
Today I'll take you through a case that shocked Germany. A story of love, control, and a ruthless, premeditated plan. She seemed to have achieved the greatest victory in her life, marrying a successful, wealthy German man who loved her deeply. This might be the dream of many women, but what lay ahead for the young and beautiful Russian woman Ekaterina Baumann was not a happy married life, but an inevitable nightmare, an unimaginable tragedy. Ekaterina Bulgova was born on May 13, 1989 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, Russia. She was a vibrant, intelligent, and beautiful young woman. Her life was bright and full of hope, but fate brought her something darker. In 2009, 20-year-old Ekaterina went on vacation with her family to Turkey, a country full of sun, sea, and seemingly endless possibilities. There she met Walter Baumann, a German who was 13 years older than her. Born in Kazakhstan, a former Soviet republic that, like Russia, was part of the USSR until 1991, Walter speaks fluent Russian. Walter had a steady job and a good income in Germany, but his personal life was not going well. He was desperately looking for the perfect woman, but he was far from an ideal man. He lived with his parents, paid no attention to his appearance, dressed slovenly, and was generally unkempt and unattractive. Most of his romantic adventures took place online, and almost all of the women he pursued were Russian. Walter even once went to Russia to meet a woman he had been chatting with for a long time. However, when they met, she was unimpressed and immediately broke off contact. When Walter suddenly found himself on a romantic break with such a beautiful young woman as Ekaterina, his friends could not believe their eyes. Ekaterina could have had many suitors, but for some reason she chose Walter. Perhaps there was an unspoken connection between these two lonely souls that neither side could explain. After the vacation, Ekaterina returned to Russia and Walter returned to Germany, but their connection remained strong. They stayed in touch through long conversations on social media and hour-long phone calls, sharing their thoughts, dreams, and feelings. Walter proudly told his friend how beautiful Ekaterina was. He talked about their deep conversations, and even the poems they wrote for each other. To prove his devotion, he often flew to St. Petersburg to visit her and spent a considerable amount of money on these trips. At the time, Ekaterina was a sophomore at St. Petersburg University. Walter saw a future for her and convinced her to transfer to the University of Hamburg to ensure she could move to Germany. In 2010, Ekaterina left home, her family, and everything familiar to start a new life in Bremerhaven, a port city on the North Sea coast of Germany. People who knew Ekaterina described her as a smart, charming, and cheerful young woman. Despite living so far away from home, she remained close to her family, continued to study business administration, and pursued her passion for running and yoga. A few months after arriving in Germany, Walter and Ekaterina had a grand wedding. Walter's close friend and former wedding photographer Alexander remembers the moment vividly. "I have photographed countless weddings, but I have never seen a bride as radiant and truly happy as Ekaterina." The wedding was lavish and took place at a lighthouse. From there, the newlyweds left in a huge white carriage, something Germany had never seen before. But it felt a little strange. Despite the luxury, the guest list was surprisingly small. The few people present noticed an unusual atmosphere. There was some tension lurking just beneath the surface. The wedding ended earlier than expected, which raised questions afterward. When you look at wedding photos, you might see the image of a seemingly perfect couple who are deeply in love. But what about the reality? Ekaterina had no idea that behind the fairy tale appearance, she was falling into a nightmare from which she could never escape. Ekaterina had believed that her marriage would be a fairy tale, a new beginning in Germany with the man of her choice. But instead of finding a warm home where the two could live together, she moved in with her parents-in-law. This is where the real nightmare began. Life with in-laws is not easy, but for a young woman abroad, it is even more challenging. Walter's mother, Ludmila Baumann, was no ordinary mother-in-law. She was a strong-willed, domineering woman who had a firm grip on her son's life. In fact, Her role in this story was far more important than anyone imagined. To understand how much of an influence she had on Walter's actions, we must first understand who Lyudmila Bauman really was, and whose existence sealed not only her son's fate, but Ekaterina's tragic fate as well. Born in Kazakhstan, Lyudmila Bauman embodied the spirit of a strong, determined, and ambitious woman. From a young age, she excelled academically. Her career was equally impressive. She rose through the ranks as a chemical engineering assistant, became a chemical engineer, and later a high school teacher, a path that was far from easy for a woman of her time. But Lyudmila was not one to shy away from a challenge. She had a will of steel and was willing to do anything to achieve her goals. At 18, she married and gave birth to her only son, Walter Bauman. From that moment on, Walter became everything to her. Her love for her son was not the usual maternal love, but possession, control, and an unwavering grip. Perhaps this is why Walter never really made decisions for himself as a child. Even as an adult, he was still bound by his mother's invisible chains. Due to the Bauman family's German roots, they had the opportunity to emigrate from Kazakhstan to Germany in search of a better future. Bremerhaven became their new home. However, despite the change in geography, Lyudmila never changed her controlling nature. She continued to pursue her career ambitions and soon became the leading expert at a marine research institute, an extraordinary achievement achieved by a few women. Thanks to her groundbreaking contributions to science and inspiring immigrant journey, Lyudmila became a well-known figure in Germany's immigrant community. Her achievements are immortalized in a 1-meter-long portrait that hangs on the facade of the Bremerhaven Immigrant Center, along with 30 other prominent figures, a testament to her influence and success. But beneath the surface, she was a mother who never let go of her son. Her unyielding control over Walter not only shaped his character, but also determined the fate of the women who entered his life. Most tragically, Ekaterina Bauman. Although Walter was already in his 30s, in Lyudmila's eyes, he was still just a boy who needed her protection and control. She could not accept the fact that her son was an adult, married, and had his own family. In her eyes, Walter was still hers, and no one, not even his wife, could change that. When Walter is not at home, his phone rings every hour. "Where are you? When are you coming back? Who are you with?" She is more than just worried. She wants to control every second of her son's life. For Lyudmila, Walter is not a person who has the right to make his own decisions about his life. He is the only child she does not want to lose. From the beginning, Ekaterina felt the suffocating grip of her mother-in-law, but she did everything she could to win Lyudmila's approval. She wanted to be accepted, to prove that she was a worthy wife for Walter. But no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Lyudmila constantly interfered in her son's marriage, criticizing and slandering Ekaterina at every opportunity. She considered herself an incompetent wife and a failed housewife. Ekaterina tried to change her mother-in-law's opinion of her, hoping to repair the broken relationship. But every attempt ended in disappointment. Even her choice of clothes became a battleground. She could not escape her judgment. Ekaterina could not be herself. In her own home, in her own life, she was nothing more than a guest living by someone else's rules. Walter earned around 4,000 euros a month working at the port. Unlike others who sought time off to enjoy life, he worked tirelessly, even on weekends and holidays, simply because these shifts paid better. Walter's real motivation was greed. Despite his considerable savings, he hoarded his earnings and refused to spend more than was necessary. Every euro was counted and every expense was scrutinized. It wasn't about ensuring a better future, but about never giving up on your money. After Ekaterina became pregnant in 2017, Walter finally decided to dip into his carefully guarded savings, but only a small portion of them. He bought a house so they could move out of his parents' house. However, the search for a home was a painful and long process. Determined to spend as little as possible, Walter checked every option to find the cheapest deal. Ekaterina hoped that moving into her own home would improve their relationship and be a fresh start, away from the suffocating influence of her mother-in-law. But their hopes were dashed almost immediately. Lyudmila was a constant presence in her life, visiting her regularly and continuing to interfere in all aspects of her son's marriage. During this time, Ekaterina gave birth to her first daughter. Instead of being a supportive husband and father, Walter became even more controlling. After the birth of his daughter, Walter's behavior changed dramatically. He spoke condescendingly to his wife, disparaging her, and forbade her to learn to drive, ensuring that she remained isolated and dependent. He forbade her from speaking German with their daughter and insisted that she speak only one language, Russian. It was difficult for Ekaterina to understand her husband's sudden transformation. His jealousy, possessiveness, and unpredictability became more serious every day. Even the smallest problem could trigger his explosive temper. The once tense marriage was now on the verge of complete collapse. The arguments between them escalated into quarrels and violent accusations. But then Walter crossed a line that could never be redeemed. He began to use his physical strength against his wife. At the end of 2019, the authorities received the first report of domestic violence in the Baumann family. However, when social workers got involved, Walter and Ekaterina claimed they had reconciled, and the case was quickly closed. But privately, the abuse never stopped. Ekaterina and Walter continued to argue, shout, and insult each other, even in front of their young daughter. Walter's need for control turned into an obsession. He secretly took photos and videos of Ekaterina and recorded their arguments on his phone. He tried to have a tech-savvy acquaintance hack into her phone but was rebuffed. He accused Ekaterina of being a bad mother and claimed she was mentally unstable. Ekaterina in turn criticized Walter for his indifference and emotional distance, overwork. In the fall of 2020, she finally sought help. Ekaterina sought support at a domestic violence crisis center. It was the first step toward escaping Walter's control, but it also set off a chain of events that ultimately led to their tragic fate. For a moment, Ekaterina thought she had finally escaped. Leaving home with his daughter felt like escaping a prison built on control, fear, and manipulation. But Walter wasn't going to let her go so easily. He begged her to come back and swore that he had changed and realized the mistakes of his ways. Just as she had so many times before, Ekaterina forgave him. She returned home hoping, perhaps foolishly, that things would be different this time. But they were not. Whenever Walter felt that he had gone too far, he would buy gifts or plan a family vacation to smooth things over. But these changes were only temporary, nothing more than calculated actions to keep Ekaterina under his control. His actions changed not only his wife, but also their 3-year-old daughter. Walter became obsessed with and constantly monitored the child. He cut back on work just to be able to spend more time with her. He took her to and from kindergarten every night, cooked her meals, and insisted that she sleep in the same room as her parents. But people who knew Walter saw something different. They described him as a manipulator, someone who exaggerated every situation, someone who was both impatient and stingy. Money was his real obsession. It dictated his every move, his every decision. After having her child, Ekaterina made several trips to Russia to visit her family, but Walter never left her alone. During these years, Ekaterina began to seriously consider divorce. She saw how Walter's control exceeded all limits, and how his behavior became increasingly repressive and abusive. Then she noticed something disturbing. All her personal documents were gone. One day, during one of Lyudmila's frequent visits, the tension between the couple reached a boiling point. A violent argument broke out. This time Walter didn't just scream, he threw Ekaterina out of the house. He pushed her aside like an unwanted object and closed the door behind her. Ekaterina had nowhere to go. She contacted the police, who stepped in and forced Walter to let her back. But the damage was already done. The marriage was no longer a relationship, but a battlefield. Another quarrel broke out in public, this time in front of her daughter's kindergarten. It was bad enough that the school administration filed a report with the Youth Welfare Office. The authorities intervened and placed the family under official surveillance. For the next 6 weeks, a crisis counselor was assigned to observe the family and assess the child's safety. The result was devastating. The child cannot live with either parent. The environment is too dangerous. Ekaterina stayed in Germany for her daughter. She could no longer endure the abusive marriage, but escaping was not easy. She could not take the child back to Russia without Walter's written consent. In August 2021, Ekaterina tried to escape again, taking her daughter to seek shelter at a women's crisis center. This time, she did not hold back any longer. She told the authorities exactly what she feared. Her husband wanted to kill her. The Youth Welfare Office immediately stepped in. For safety reasons, officials recommended placing the 5-year-old girl in an orphanage. A psychologist from the Youth Welfare Office assessed the situation and described it as extremely serious. Ekaterina had no choice but to agree to place her daughter in foster care. But then Walter and his mother intervened. They opposed the decision and refused to hand the child over to state care. The result? A compromise. The little girl was forced to divide her time between her parents. Sometimes she lived with her father. Other days she lived with her mother in a women's shelter. This fragile arrangement lasted for a few weeks, but cracks had already formed. Some Russian sources later reported that living conditions at Ekaterina's home were miserable. Her roommates were difficult to get along with, and the kindergarten was too far away for her to attend regularly. Under these circumstances, Ekaterina and her daughter finally returned home. But it was no longer home. At the same time, divorce proceedings officially began. Ekaterina and Walter still lived under the same roof, but in separate rooms. Walter did not stop her from leaving Germany, but there was a problem. He would only allow her to leave the country if her daughter stayed with him. Ekaterina could never accept that. In early 2021, and again in 2022, she traveled alone to St. Petersburg. Every time she returned to Germany, she knew her escape was far from over. While in Russia, Ekaterina made a new friend. He was a pilot from Omsk, Siberia, whom she met over the internet. Unlike the oppressive marriage she was trapped in, this new relationship felt light, exciting, and full of possibilities. After returning to Germany in mid-January 2022, she continued to speak to him every day. Their conversations were full of love, and countless loving messages were exchanged. For the first time in a long time, Ekaterina felt hopeful, but hope didn't last long. On February 4th, 2022, just a few weeks after returning to Germany, she suddenly stopped responding. She couldn't reach her family. She heard nothing from her new lover. According to Walter, Ekaterina ran away again. He claimed that on the night she disappeared, she took an empty suitcase and 13,000 euros from his hidden stash. She left behind her phone, keys, clothes, and most shockingly, her 5-year-old daughter. This is the version he told the police on February 6th, 2022. For 2 days, they had been desperately trying to contact their daughter. When every call went unanswered, they turned to the German authorities for a welfare check. So the search for Ekaterina Baumann began. The way Ekaterina's disappearance came to light was strange. Her phone was silent for days. No calls, no messages, only an eerie silence. Her mother, Svetlana, became increasingly anxious. She tried to call her daughter several times, but no one answered. Desperate for answers, she turned to Walter, hoping he could explain Ekaterina's sudden disappearance. His response was disturbingly indifferent. "I haven't seen her since February 5th. He claimed that she might not respond because there was no money left in her bank account. It felt like something was very wrong. Panic broke out. Ekaterina's parents feared the worst. On February 6th, 2022, they contacted the German police to check on their daughter. Then the search for Ekaterina began. The entire city of Bremerhaven was mobilized, with volunteers combing the streets and searching every inch of the city. Flyers with Ekaterina's face were posted on walls, street corners, and store windows. Everyone was looking for her. Everyone, except Walter. While relatives and strangers desperately searched for Ekaterina, her husband was busy doing something completely different. Walter wasn't looking for his missing wife. Walter was repainting the living room floor and replacing an old sofa. When police arrived at the Baumann home on February 9th, 2022, 4 days after Ekaterina went missing, they noticed something unusual. Walter had finished his renovations. He was also seen buying an unusual amount of cleaning supplies at a local store. Most suspicious of all, the surveillance footage from the home's security cameras had mysteriously disappeared. Investigators searched the Bauman's home for 3 hours, looking for signs of foul play. A trained search dog was sent in to sniff the garage and the house itself. In the garage, the dog became visibly agitated, but he never sounded the alarm. An initial forensic analysis found no direct evidence, no blood, no physical signs of foul play. But when the police checked Walter's car, they found something disturbing. Amid the chaos and trash, the police found a knife and a stun gun. Both were seized as possible evidence. But what was most striking was not what they found, but Walter's behavior. He only asked the police one question: "Will I get sole custody of my daughter if she doesn't come back?" Ekaterina was missing. All Walter cared about was whether he could consider his daughter his own. The police knew that the possibility that a young mother would voluntarily abandon her child and leave her phone, documents, and all her belongings abroad was extremely low. This was not a case of escape. It was something worse. From the beginning, Walter's story didn't make sense. His claim that Ekaterina had taken nothing with her except an empty suitcase sounded absurd. The more investigators looked into the case, the more they doubted him. Meanwhile, the city of Bremerhaven and beyond was gripped by fear and uncertainty. Even women who had never seen Ekaterina felt compelled to take action. Local volunteers launched a massive search operation. "We will continue our search until we know what happened to her," vowed one organizer. 2 weeks after Ekaterina went missing, nearly 400 volunteers from all over northern Germany searched Bremerhaven with the help of search dogs. Her story spread like wildfire on social media, sparking outrage and concern. News of Ekaterina's disappearance spread not only to Germany but quickly to Russia. Her family did everything they could to raise awareness of her case, which was soon featured on major Russian news channels. Then her mother told the story. "My daughter has been with this man for 12 years, but for the past year and a half their marriage has been nothing but quarrels. He beat her several times. He locked her up like a prisoner. He confiscated her ID and bank cards. He did not let anyone see her." A passerby walking along the Weser River noticed a strange suitcase washed up on the shore. Curious, he approached it. Inside was the dismembered body, carefully packed in black garbage bags. But not all the remains were there, some parts were missing. When forensic scientists examined the evidence, the devastating truth was confirmed. The victim was 32-year-old Ekaterina Bauman. The suitcase washed up near the lighthouse, exactly where she had stood in her wedding dress, believing she had found love and a new beginning. But for her loved ones, any hope of a happy ending was completely shattered. All they could do was say goodbye to a daughter, a mother, and a friend who had suffered an unimaginable fate. Shocked by the tragedy, the people of Bremerhaven held a small, impromptu memorial service. Strangers who had never met Ekaterina laid flowers, lit candles, and wrote letters. After her body was found, the police had no more doubts about who was responsible. Walter Bauman was arrested, the only and main suspect. The forensic team searched the house and garage for several days. Inside, they found a bottle of a powerful sedative that was later confirmed to be in Ekaterina's blood, disposable gloves, foil, and tape that suggested a carefully planned crime. A large supply of garbage bags and industrial cleaning products, too much for normal household use. But there was more. Investigators also found cans of acetic acid, solvents, and bleach, the key to the suitcase where Ekaterina's body was found. The pink scarf she wore in her last selfie was hidden in the garage and storage room, yet the house seemed strangely empty. Almost all of Ekaterina's personal belongings were missing. Most of her clothes had been thrown away as if her existence had been erased. Even their wedding photo, which had once symbolized happiness, was found hidden behind a piano as if someone couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Another important piece of evidence was found in a trash can at Lyudmila Bauman's workplace. It was the white jacket that Ekaterina wore in her last selfie. There was no reason for the jacket to be there. When Walter was detained by the police, he didn't focus on proving his innocence. Instead, he turned to the person who had always protected him, his mother. From prison, he wrote letter after letter to Lyudmila, confessing his deep love for her and begging for her help. His words were filled with desperation. "Help us, Mom. Save us. You can do it. You are my only hope for the future." But what did he mean by these words? This question would not become clear until 8 months later. Because on Friday, February 4th, 2022, Ekaterina experienced her last day. At 4:30 p.m. on February 4th, 2022, Ekaterina went for a walk in a light-colored coat and yellow skirt. She strolled for 10 minutes, unaware that these were her last moments alive in public. Neighbors' surveillance cameras recorded footage of a woman who had no idea of her fate. That evening, the Baumans sat down to dinner. The meal consisted of tuna, halibut, mashed potatoes, olives, and a bottle of wine. According to Walter, Ekaterina had only one glass, while he drank the rest. He later told police that he was tired, so he went to bed early, at 8 p.m. Later, court records contradicted Walter's timeline. At 7:41 p.m., Ekaterina's phone was last connected to the network. At 8:25 p.m., she had a video call with her new lover via her computer. During that call, she was in a good mood, smiling and telling him that she would call again after she put her daughter to bed. But that call never came. She never called him. She never called anyone. 2 hours later, her Russian lover sent her a goodnight message, but she never read it. By this time, Ekaterina was dead. A forensic examination later confirmed the time of death, about 2 hours after dinner. An analysis of the stomach contents found traces of a strong sedative mixed with alcohol. Her hyoid bone was fractured, indicating the cause of death: strangulation. Experts concluded that everything else that was done to her body was done with extremely precise and extremely sharp tools. The morning after Ekaterina's murder, Walter was unusually quiet. At 7:22 a.m., he briefly opened the car door. He left at 10:20 a.m. He returned at 4:49 p.m. 3 days later, Walter called Ekaterina, not because he was worried, but to make it seem as if she had really run away. He also sent several text messages: "Ekaterina, where are you?" But perhaps the most shocking detail is this: Walter and his mother were in touch every day via WhatsApp, until February 4th. After that night, there was only silence. Their daily conversations stopped completely. In mid-February, Walter took his car to the repair shop. There, he told an employee that the entire interior needed to be thoroughly cleaned from top to bottom. It was clear he was desperately trying to eradicate something. On August 26, 2022, Walter finally went to trial. Long before that night, he had made plans for her body. So what was the motive? He feared he would lose custody of their daughter if Ekaterina divorced him. He was obsessed with money. Divorce meant financial loss. The evidence against him was overwhelming. When police seized Walter's phone and computer, they found something even more disturbing: his search history in the months leading up to Ekaterina's death. Among other things, he conducted the following search queries on the internet. If I took someone's life, how can I avoid punishment? What acid dissolves flesh? How many liters of acid does it take to fill a bathtub? How do you read someone's WhatsApp messages? How long does it take to die after taking a sedative? Can you be convicted without evidence in Germany? Between December 2021 and February 2022, Walter searched for similar queries more than 500 times. On the night she disappeared, Walter searched the word stun gun twice on Google. Forensic experts subsequently found traces of electric shock on Ekaterina's body. For 2 long months, he refused to say a word. No defense, no denial, no remorse. Sometimes, when witnesses testified against him, he covered his ears as if it had nothing to do with him. He sat there, expressionless, distant, except for a few moments. The only time Walter showed real emotion was when he saw his mother, Lyudmila Bauman, in court. When she took the stand, Walter's composure finally broke. He clasped his hands together and stared at her, tears streaming down his face, as if in a silent prayer. He pleaded with her in a letter from prison, "Take me out of here, Mom." It looked like she was ready. When Lyudmila Bauman finally spoke, the court was shocked. She did not defend her son. She did not ask for leniency, instead she took responsibility. "It was me, not my son." As Lyudmila recalled, she went to her son and daughter-in-law's house in the middle of the night. Walter called her and asked her to come and take care of her granddaughter. When she arrived, she found Ekaterina sleeping on the sofa. She claimed that she just wanted to wake her up, so she began to shake her gently. But according to Lyudmila, Ekaterina woke up angry and slapped her. "She attacked me," Lyudmila insisted. Then, she said, the fight turned violent. In the heat of the fight, she strangled her son's wife, and it wasn't over yet. Lyudmila admitted that after Ekaterina's death, she disposed of her body. She did not explain why, but one thing was clear. She was willing to do anything to save her son. "I loved Ekaterina like a daughter. I never wanted anything like this to happen." These are the words Lyudmila Bauman said in court, her voice shaking as she admitted responsibility for her daughter-in-law's death. But was she really guilty? Or was this the ultimate sacrifice? A mother willing to take the blame to protect her only son. One side called for her immediate arrest, another called for Walter's release. None of that happened. Lyudmila remains free, while her son remains in prison. But Lyudmila's fight isn't over. To protect Walter, she wrote a detailed letter to the court, detailing what she had done with Ekaterina's body. "My son didn't do it," she insisted again. She asked to be questioned and to renew her accusation. But the court refused. Instead, she inadvertently provided more incriminating evidence. Investigators had known all along that Ekaterina's remains had not been found in their entirety. Then, shockingly, Lyudmila told them exactly where to look. When the police followed their instructions, they found another bag that had been deliberately weighted down so that it would sink. She had been found exactly where Lyudmila said she would be. How would she have known if she hadn't been involved? Then came another disturbing news. Lyudmila's phone pedometer data showed that she had walked 200 meters around 4 a.m. on the night of the murder. Meanwhile, a neighbor's security camera recorded someone walking past Walter's house. Even more distressing, Walter's father's phone showed activity at the same time. He had driven Lyudmila to Walter's house, even though he told the police he had fallen asleep. At the time, experts confirmed that Ekaterina was dead, which meant that Lyudmila was lying. Yet she was never arrested or charged. What was Lyudmila's real involvement? She was at the crime scene. She knew the location of the missing remains. She helped clean the house. Although she was not the murderer, she helped cover it up. She was an accomplice by all definitions. But under German law, she remained free. Strange, isn't it? All the evidence pointed to Walter. Throughout the trial, Walter remained mostly silent. But at the final hearing, he broke his silence. He read 230 pages of notes and remembered his childhood in Kazakhstan, his struggles and dreams, his alleged love for Ekaterina and her daughter. He spent 230 pages talking about himself, but he only mentioned the night that changed everything. But the most frightening thing about the whole case is not just the brutality of the crime. This was not the way Walter planned it, nor the way his mother tried to take responsibility. Witnessing all this, there was only one silent witness, her 5-year-old daughter. The whole nightmare happened before the innocent eyes of a child. Now, Ekaterina's mother, her only blood relative, is forbidden to speak to her granddaughter. Walter had tried to control his wife for years, but in the end he couldn't control the facts. Now his fate was sealed.